Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, we continue reading from the Prabhupada Lilamrta. This is a biography of the great saint, spiritual master, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And it's compiled by his disciple Satsvarupa. Das Goswami. It's written very beautifully, very nice. It's getting cold here in Florida. It's 78 degrees, freezing. Used to the 90s, and it's dipped down now. Weather's changing. 78. Ew. Put the heat on. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We read previously Prabhupada's birth. We found out about his father and mother. And then his childhood activities. And his college, marriage, and involvement with Gandhi's movement, and then his meeting of his spiritual master, and his opening a business, an apothecary business, pharmaceuticals in Allahabad. And now Bhaktisiddhanta is taking the biggest parikrama, that's circumambulation of the holy places, that has ever been seen in Vrndavan. And he's attracted so many people, hundreds and hundreds of people, and they're taking this parikrama, and they travel from one sacred place to another. They have tents and kitchens and all kinds of gear. They set up camp each night in a different area. And Prabhupada, he wasn't Prabhupada yet. His birth name, he still had his family name, Abhay Charan Day. So Abhay, he's very much involved in his business activities, and for him, it's not just to get money. It's he uses his income to support the small temple there and Bhaktisiddhanta's preaching efforts. So he's very motivated to make money because it's his service to his spiritual master. In order to do that, he has to put a lot of time into business. And so it's hard for him to break away to actually be with Bhaktisiddhanta. But he's made a point of it, and at least for the last day or two, he is determined to join this Parikrama in Vrndavan. It was in 1930 something? Yeah, right around there. 1932. It's the largest Parikrama ever seen in Vrndavan. Abhay arrived in Mathura by train from Allahabad and approached Koshi by rickshaw. Rickshaw there's a guy on a bicycle and there's a little passenger carriage hooked to it, a rickshaw. Sometimes a horse, but usually people power. The countryside was full of charm for Abhay. Instead of factories and large buildings, there were mostly forests. And aside from the main paved road on which he traveled, there were only dirt roads and soft sandy lanes. As a Vaishnava, Abhay felt sensations an ordinary man wouldn't. Now and then he sighted a peacock in the field, its exotic plumage proclaiming the glories of Vrndavan and Krishna. Even a non-devotee, however, could appreciate the many varieties of birds, their interesting cries, and songs filling the air. Occasionally a tree would be filled with madly chirping sparrows making their urgent twilight clamor before resting for the night. Even one unaware of the special significance of Vrndavan could feel a relief of mind in the simple countryside where people built fires from cow manure fuel and cooked their evening meals in the open, their fires adding rich, natural smells to the indefinable mixture which was the odor of the earth. There were many gnarled old trees and colorful stretches of flowers, bushes of bright violet camellia, trees abloom with delicate white parijata blossoms, and big yellow kadamba flowers rarely seen outside of Vrndavan. On the road there were lively horse-drawn Tanga traffic. The month of Kartik, October-November, was one of the several times of the year that drew many pilgrims to Vrndavan. The one-horse Tangas carried large families, some coming from hundreds of miles away. Large bands of pilgrims, grouped by village, walked together, the women dressed in bright-colored saris. Brown-skinned men and women, sometimes singing bhajans, carrying but a few simple possessions as they headed for the town of thousands of temples, Vrndavan. And there were businessmen like Abai, dressed more formally, coming from a city, maybe to spend the weekend. Most of them had some semblance of religious motive. To see Krishna in the temple, to bathe in the holy Yamuna River, to visit the sites where Lord Krishna had performed his pastimes, such as lifting of Govardhan Hill, the killing of the Keshi demon, or the dancing in the evening with the gopis. Abai was sensitive to the atmosphere of Vrndavan, and he noted the activity along the road. But more than that, he cherished with anticipation the fulfillment of his journey. His meeting again, after a long separation, the saintly person he had always thought of within himself, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who had spoken to him in Calcutta and convinced him of Lord Chaitanya's mission to preach Krishna consciousness. Abai would soon see him again, and this purpose filled his mind. I hate to interrupt, but this is the actual purpose of going to a holy place, or a temple, or a sacred river. It's not simply to take a bath. It is because there may be someone there, an actual realized soul, a pure devotee of Krishna. And it may be possible to make some advancement by meeting them. So that's Prabhupada Abai's mood, is he loves Vrndavan. He always wanted to go to Vrndavan. He loves Vrndavan. I think he went once before. But his reason for going now is to meet that saintly person, Bhaktisiddhanta. Upon reaching the lantern-illuminated camp of the Gaudiya Math and inquiring at the registration post, he was allowed to join the Parikrama village. He was assigned to a tent of Grihastha men and was offered prasadam. The people were friendly and in good spirits, and Abai talked of his activities with the Math members in Calcutta and Allahabad. Then there was a gathering. A sannyasi was making an announcement. This evening, he said, there would be a scheduled visit to a nearby temple to see the deity of Sheshai, Vishnu. Some of the pilgrims cheered, Haribol, Hare Krishna. The sannyasi also announced that His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would speak that evening for the last time and would be leaving the Parikrama party the next day. So there was a choice of going on the Parikrama or staying for the lecture. Srila Prabhupada, this is a little Prabhupada directly saying here. So I met them in Koshi, and Keshava Maharaj was informing that Bhaktisiddhanta is going to Mathura tomorrow morning and he will speak Harikatha this evening. Anyone who wants to remain. Anyone who wants can remain, or otherwise they may go see Seshashayi Vishnu. So at that time, I think only 10-12 men remained. Sridhar Maharaj was one of them, and I thought it was. What can I see? Seshayi. Let me hear what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati will speak. Let me hear. When Abai arrived, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was already speaking. He sat with his back erect, a shawl around his shoulders, not speaking like a professional lecturer giving a scheduled performance, but addressing a small gathering in his room. At last, Abai was in his presence again. Abai marveled to see and hear him, this unique soul possessed of Krishna Katha, speaking uninterruptedly about Krishna in his deep, low voice, in ecstasy and deep knowledge. Abai sat and heard with rapt attention. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been speaking regularly about Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Sambandha is the stage of devotional service in which awareness of God is awakened. Abhideya is rendering loving service to the Lord, and Prayojana is the ultimate goal, pure love of God. He stressed that his explanations were in exact recapitulation of what had originally been spoken by Krishna and passed down through disciplic succession. Hare Krishna Mara. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's particular utterance, mostly Bengali, but sometimes English, was frequent quoting of Sanskrit from the Shastras with deep erudition. It is Krishna, said Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who is the only super Lord over the entire universe and beyond it of Vaikuntha, the transcendental region. As such, no one can raise any obstacle against his enjoyment. An hour went by, 2 hours. The already small gathering in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's room gradually thinned. A few sannyasis left, excusing themselves to tend to duties connected with the Parikrama camp. Only a few intimate leaders remained. Abai was the only outsider. Of course, he was a devotee, not an outsider, but in the sense that he was not a sannyasi, was not handling any duties, was not even initiated, and was not traveling with the Parikrama, but had joined only for a day. In that sense, he was an outsider. The philosophy of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati that he was speaking, however, was democratically open to whoever would give an ardent hearing. And that Abai was doing. He was listening with wonder. Sometimes he would not even understand something, but he would go on listening intently, submissively, his intelligence drinking in the words. He felt Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati revealing to him the direct vision of the spiritual world, just as a person reveals something by opening a door or pushing aside a curtain. He was revealing the reality, and this reality was loving service to the lotus feet of Radha Krishna, the supremely worshipful personality of Godhead. How masterfully he spoke, and with utter conviction and boldness. It was with such awe that Abai listened with fastened attention. Of course, all Vaishnavas accept Krishna as their worshipful Lord, but how conclusively and with what sound logic was the faith of the Vaishnavas established by this great teacher. After several hours, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati stopped speaking. Abai felt prepared to go on listening without cessation, and yet He had no puzzling doubts or queries to place forward. He only wanted to hear more. As Bhaktisiddhanta made his exit, Abai bowed, offering his obeisances, and then left the intimate circle of the sannyasis in a row of tents, and went to the outer circle of tents, his mind surcharged with the words of his spiritual master. Now their relationship seemed more tangible. He still treasured his original impression of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the saintly person who had spoken to him on the rooftop in Calcutta. But tonight, that single impression that had sustained him for years in Allahabad had been enriched and filled with new life. His spiritual master and the impression of his words were as much a reality as the stars in the sky and the moon over Vrndavan. That impression of hearing from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was filling him with its reality, and all other reality was forming itself around the absolute reality of Srila Gurudev, just as the planets circle around the sun. The next morning, Abai was up with the others more than an hour before dawn, bathed and chanting mantras in congregation. Later in the morning, the tall, stately figure of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, dressed in plain saffron, got into the back seat of a car and rode away from the camp. Thoughtful and grave, he looked back and waved, accepting the loving farewell gestures of his followers. Abai stood among them. Okay, going on to another little section here. A little more than a month later, Abai was again anticipating an imminent meeting with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, this time at Allahabad. Abai had only recently returned from Vrndavan to his work at Prayag Pharmacy when the devotees at the Allahabad Gaudiya Math informed him of the good news. They had secured land and funds for constructing a building. The Sri Rupa Gaudiya Math and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would be coming on November 21st to preside over the ceremony for the laying of the cornerstone. Sir William Malcolm Haley, a governor of the United Provinces, would be the respected guest, and in a grand ceremony would lay the foundation stone in the presence of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. When Abai learned that there would also be an initiation ceremony, he asked if he could be initiated. Atulananda, the Math president, assured Abai that he would introduce him to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. At home, Abai discussed his initiation plans with his wife. She had no objection, but she did not want to take initiation herself. They were already worshipping the deity at home and offering their food to the deity. They believed in God and were living peacefully. But for Abai, there was not enough. Although he would not force his wife, he knew that he must be initiated by a pure devotee. Avoiding sinful life, living piously, these things were necessary and good, but in themselves they did not constitute spiritual life and could not satisfy the yearning of the soul. Life's ultimate goal and the absolute necessity of the self was love of Krishna. That love of Krishna his father had already inculcated within him, and now he had to take the next step. His father would have been pleased to see him do it. What he had learned from his father was now being solidified by someone capable of guiding all the fallen souls of the world to transcendental love of God. Abai knew that he should go forward and take complete shelter in the instructions of his spiritual master, and the scriptures enjoined, "He who is desirous of knowing the absolute truth must take shelter of a spiritual master, who is in disciplic succession and who is fixed in Krishna consciousness." Even Lord Chaitanya, who was Krishna himself, had accepted a spiritual master, and only after initiation did he manifest the full symptoms of ecstatic love of Krishna while chanting the holy name. As for the ritual initiation he had received at age 12 from a family priest, Abai had never taken it very seriously. It had been a religious formality, but a guru who was not a mere officiating ritualistic priest Krishna. But a guru was not a merely officiating ritualistic priest. So Abai had rejected the idea that he already had a guru. He had never received instructions from him in bhakti, and his family guru had not linked him through disciplic succession with Krishna. But by taking initiation from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he would be linked with Krishna. Bhaktisiddhanta, son of Bhaktivedanta Thakur and disciple of Gaurkishore Das Babaji, was the guru in the 12th disciplic generation from Lord Chaitanya. He was the foremost Vedic scholar of the age, the expert Vaishnava who could guide one back to Godhead. He was empowered by his predecessors to work for the highest welfare by giving everyone Krishna consciousness, the remedy for all sufferings. Abai felt that he had already accepted Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as his spiritual master, and that from their very first meeting, he'd already received his orders. The very first meeting, when they first came in the room, Abai and his friend, Bhaktisiddhanta said, "You're educated young men, preach in the West, preach in English." He hadn't even sat down or bowed down or anything yet. They just walked into the room. Abai felt he had already accepted Bhaktisiddhanta as his spiritual master, and from their very first meeting, he had already received his orders. Now, if Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would accept him as his disciple, the relationship would be confirmed. He was coming so soon after Abai had seen and heard him in Vrndavan. That was how Krishna acted, through his representative. It was as if his spiritual master, in coming to where Abai and his family and his business, was coming to draw him further into spiritual life. Without Abai's having attempted to bring it about, his relationship with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was deepening. Now Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was coming to him as if by a higher arrangement. So that's another little section here. On the day of the ceremony, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati met with his disciples at the Allahabad Gaudiya Mat on South Malika Street. While he was speaking Hari Katha and taking questions, Atulananda Brahmachari took the opportunity to present several devotees, Abai amongst them, as candidates for initiation. The Allahabad devotees were proud of Mr. Day, Abai, who regularly attended the mat in the evening and led bhajans, listened to the teachings and spoke them himself, and often brought respectable guests. He had contributed money and had induced his business colleagues to do so too. With folded palms, Abai looked up humbly at his spiritual master. He and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta were now face to face, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta recognized him and was visibly pleased to see him. He already knew him. "Yes," he said, exchanging looks with Abai. "He likes to hear. He does not go away. I've marked him. I will accept him as my disciple." At the moment, as the moment and the words became impressed into his being, Abai was in ecstasy. Atulananda was pleasingly surprised that his Gurudev was already in approval of Mr. Day. Other disciples in the room were so pleased to witness Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's immediate acceptance of Mr. Day, as a good listener. Some of them wondered when or where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had arrived at such an estimation of the young pharmacist. Janasunya, Haribo, reading the early days, Prabhupada before coming to the West. He's just been accepted for initiation by Bhaktisiddhanta. At the initiation, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was seated on a Vyasasana, and the room was filled with guests and members of the Gaudiya Math. Those to be initiated sat around a small mound of earth, where one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's sannyasis prepared a fire and offered grains and fruits into the flames, while everyone chanted mantras for purification. Abhai's sister and brother were present, but not his wife. Abhai basked in the presence of his Gurudev. Yes, he likes to hear the words of his spiritual master, and his glance of recognition had remained with Abhai. Abhai would continue pleasing his spiritual master by hearing well. Then, he thought, I will be able to speak well. The Vedic literature described 9 processes of devotional service, the first of which was Shravanam, hearing about Krishna. Then came Kirtanam, chanting and glorifying him. By sitting patiently and hearing at Koshi, he had pleased Krishna's representative. And when Krishna's representative was pleased, Krishna was pleased. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had not praised him for donating money to the Math, hadn't advised him to forsake his family and business and travel with him, nor had he asked Abhai to perform great austerities, like the yogis who mortify their bodies with fasts and difficult vows. But he likes to hear, he had said. I have marked him. Abhai thought about it, and again listened carefully as his spiritual master conducted the initiation. Finally, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta called for Abhai to come forward and receive the Harinam initiation by accepting his beads. After offering prostrated obeisances, Abhai extended his right hand and accepted the strand of japa beads from the hand of his spiritual master. At the same time, he also received the sacred Brahminical thread, signifying second initiation. Usually, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta gave the first initiation, Harinam, and only after some time, when he was satisfied with the progress of the disciple, would he give the second initiation. But he offered Abhai both his initiations at the same time. Now Abhai was a full-fledged disciple, a Brahmin, who could perform sacrifices, such as this fire yajna for initiation. He could worship the deity in the temple and would be expected to discourse widely. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta added Aravinda, lotus, to his name. And now he was Abhai Charanaravinda. After Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left Allahabad for Calcutta, Abhai keenly felt the responsibility of working on behalf of his spiritual master. At the initiation, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had instructed Abhai to study Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which outlined the loving exchanges between Krishna and his devotees and explained how a devotee can advance in spiritual life. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu was a law book for devotional service, and Abhai would study it carefully. He was glad to increase his visits to the Allahabad center and to bring new people. Even at his first meeting with his spiritual master, he had received the instruction to preach the mission of Lord Chaitanya. And now he began steadily and carefully considering how to do so. Preaching was a responsibility at least as binding as that of home and business. Even in his home, he wanted to engage as far as possible in preaching. He discussed with his wife about his plans for inviting people into their home, offering them prasad, and holding discussions about Krishna. But she didn't share his enthusiasm. Prabhupada speaks here. He says a little thing. He says, "My wife was a devotee of Krishna, but she had some other idea. Her idea was just to worship the deity at home and live peacefully. My idea was preaching." Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Let me see what time it is here. Guys, to read a little bit more. It was not possible for Abai to travel with his spiritual master or even see him often. His pharmaceutical business kept him busy and he traveled frequently. So he's had 3 meetings with Bhaktisiddhanta. That's it. After the 2 meetings, he got initiated at the 3rd. Whenever possible, however, he tried to time a business trip to Calcutta when his spiritual master was also there. Thus, over the next 4 years, he managed to see his spiritual master perhaps a dozen times. Over 4 years, he got to see him maybe 12 times. Whenever Abai visited Calcutta, the assistant librarian at the Gaudiya Math, Nityananda Brahmachari, would meet him at Howrah train station with a 2-horse carriage belonging to the Math. Nityananda saw Abai as an unusually humble and tolerant person. As they rode together to the Math, Abai would inquire eagerly into the latest activities of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Yeah, I mean, they didn't have internet, you know. I don't know, did they even have telephones? I mean, you're looking at, what, the 1930s. Well, yeah, but communication wasn't like instantaneous. So, as they rode together, Abai would inquire eagerly into the latest activities of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, his traveling, his publishing, how many centers were currently open, how his disciples were doing. They wouldn't talk much about Abai's business. Abai would stay at the Gaudiya Math, usually for about 5 days. Sometimes he would visit one of his sisters who lived in Calcutta, but his main reason for coming was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And Abai would take advantage of every opportunity to hear him. Abai didn't try to become a leader in the inner management of the Gaudiya Math. His spiritual master had initiated 18 sannyasis who carried out most of the preaching and leadership of the mission. Abai was always the householder, occupied with his own business and family, never living within the Math except for brief visits, and yet he began to develop a close relationship with his spiritual master. Sometimes Abai would go to see him at the Chaitanya Math, at the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya in Mayapur. One day at the Chaitanya Math, Abai was in the courtyard when a large poisonous snake crawled out in front of him. Abai called out for his godbrothers, but when they came, everyone simply stood looking uncertain what to do. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta came out on the veranda of the 2nd floor, glanced down, saw the snake, and immediately ordered, "Kill it!" A boy then took a large stick and killed the snake. So Prabhupada has he says something here, he says, "So I thought, how is it that Guru Maharaj ordered the snake to be killed? I was a little surprised, but later on I saw this verse and then I was very glad. Modeta sadar api rikchika sarvahataya. Even saintly persons take pleasure in the killing of a scorpion or a poisonous snake." It had remained a doubt how Guru Maharaj ordered a snake to be killed, but when I read this verse, I was very much pleased that this creature or creatures like the snake should not be shown any mercy. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was reputed to be so austere and so strong in argument against other philosophies that even his own disciples were cautious in approaching him if he were sitting alone or if they had no specific business with him. Yet, even though Abhai's contact with him was quite limited, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would always treat him kindly. So a little remembrance here from Prabhupada. When I met my Guru Maharaj, he would always treat me very affectionately. Sometimes my godbrothers would criticize because I would talk a little freely with him, and they would quote his English saying. And they would quote an English saying, "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." But I would think, fool? Well, maybe, but that is the way I am. My Guru Maharaj was always very, very affectionate to me. When I offered obeisances, he used to return, "Dasosmi, I am your servant." Sometimes, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta paced back and forth chanting the Hare Krishna mantra aloud while fingering his beads, Abhai would enter the room and also chant, walking alongside his spiritual master. Once, when Abhai entered Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's room, his spiritual master was sitting on a couch, and Abhai took his seat beside him on an equal level. But then he noticed that all the other disciples in the room were sitting on a lower level at their spiritual master's feet. Abhai kept his seat, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said nothing of it. But Abhai never again sat on an equal level with his spiritual master. Once, in a room with many disciples, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was speaking, and Abhai listening, when an old man beside Abhai motioned to him. Abhai leaned over to hear what the man wanted. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta suddenly spoke out in annoyance at the two apparently inattentive students. "Babu," he first addressed the old man beside Abhai, "do you think you have purchased me with your 150 rupees per month donation?" And then, turning to Abhai, "Why don't you come up here and speak instead of me?" Abhai was outwardly mortified, yet he treasured the rebuke. It was in a private meeting that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta once told Abhai of the risks he took by preaching so boldly. So this is a little section here, Prabhupada speaking directly. He says, "My Guru Maharaj's contribution is that he defeated the caste Goswamis. He defeated Brahmanism. He did it the same way as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did. As Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Kiba Vipra, Kiba Nyasi, Sudra Keninaya, Ye Krishna Tattva Veta, Se Guru Haya. There is no consideration whether one is a sannyasi, a Brahmin, a Sudra, or a Grihastha. Anyone who knows the science of Krishna, he is all right. He is Goswami, and he is Brahmin." But no one else taught that since Lord Chaitanya. This was my Guru Maharaj's contribution, and for this reason he had to face so many vehement protests from these Brahmanas of the caste Goswamis. Once, they conspired to kill him. My Guru Maharaj told me personally, by his grace, when we used to meet alone, he used to talk about so many things. He was so kind that he used to talk with me, and he personally told me that these people, they wanted to kill me. They collected 25,000 rupees and went to bribe the police officer in charge of the area, saying, "Take these 25,000 rupees. We shall do something against Bhaktisiddhanta, and you don't do any steps." He can understand they wanted to kill him. So the police officer frankly came to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and said, "Of course, we accept bribes, and we indulge in such things, but not for a sadhu, not for a saintly person. I cannot dare." So the police officer refused and said to my Guru Maharaj, "You take care. This is the position." This was because he was so vehemently protested. And then the biographer continues, "And he liked boldness in his disciples. Abhai heard of an occasion when one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples had been very outspoken at a public meeting and had denounced a highly regarded Mayavadi monk as a foolish priest. The remark had caused a disruption at the meeting, and some of the disciples reported the incident to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, thinking he would be displeased that his disciple had caused a disturbance. But Bhaktisiddhanta was pleased and remarked, "He has done well." His displeasure occurred rather when he heard of someone's compromise. There's another little section, Prabhupada speaking. When my Guru Maharaj was present, even big scholars were afraid to talk with even his beginning students. When my Guru Maharaj was present, even big scholars were afraid to talk with even his beginning students. My Guru Maharaj was called living encyclopedia. He could talk with anyone on any subject. He was so learned, and no compromise. So-called saints, avatars, yogis, everyone who was false was an enemy to my Guru Maharaj. He never compromised. Some godbrothers complained that this preaching was a chopping technique and it would not be successful. But those who criticized him fell down. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was known as the Shinga Guru, Lion Guru. On occasion, when he saw someone he knew to be a proponent of impersonalism, he would call that person over and challenge, "Why are you cheating the people with Mayavite philosophy?" He would often tell his disciples not to compromise. "Why do you go and flatter?" he would say. "Speak the plain truth, without any flattery. Money will come anyway." When Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wrote or spoke the Vaishnava philosophy, he was uncompromising. The conclusion was according to the Shastra, and the logic strong. But sometimes Abai would hear his spiritual master express the eternal teachings in a unique way that Abai knew he would never forget. "Don't try to see God," Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would say, "but act in such a way that God sees you." Srila Bhaktisiddhanta condemned temple proprietors who made a business of showing the deity for a living. To be a sweeper in the street was more honorable, he said. He coined a Bengali phrase, Shalagram Dwara Badam Banga. The priests are taking the Shalagram deity as a stone for cracking nuts. In other words, if a person shows the Shalagram or any other form of the deity simply with a view to make money, then he's seeing the deity not as the Lord, but as a stone or a means for earning livelihood. Abai had the opportunity to see his spiritual master deal with the nationalist Subhash Chandra Bose, who had been Abai's schoolmate at Scottish Churches College. Bose had come in a somewhat critical mood, concerned about Bhaktisiddhanta's recruiting young men into religious life. So another little section where Prabhupada remembers and shares. Subhash Chandra Bose came to my Guru Maharaj and said, "So many people you have captured. They are doing nothing for nationalism." My Guru Maharaj replied, "Well, for your national propaganda, you require very strong men. But these people are very weak. You can see they're very skinny. So don't put your glance upon them. Let them eat something and chant Hare Krishna." In this way, he avoided him. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta used to say that when the day came when high court judges were devotees of Krishna with Vaishnava tilak on their foreheads, then he would know that the mission of spreading Krishna consciousness was becoming successful. Hare Krishna! He said that Jesus Christ was a Shaktivesh avatar, an empowered incarnation of God. How can it be otherwise? He said he sacrificed everything for God. So there it is, Shaktivesh avatar, is an incarnation. In his scholarly language, he declared, I think I'm going to stop there for now. Hare Krishna. Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara. It's written nicely, isn't this written beautifully? I think Satsvarupa. So he doesn't get much credit for this. You should get, this is like really nice. Hare Krishna. Yeah. Very nice. Everything supported by eyewitnesses and documentations, you know, nothing fabricated, you know. He said, she said, I think he said, maybe he said, I thought he said, no, it's all documented, it's really nice. Hare Krishna. Govinda.